Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the fascinating history of audio curation. We're going to track a massive shift, exploring how the voice in the dark, the one guiding your musical tastes and keeping you company late at night, evolved from a passionate local hero into a highly calculated corporate machine.
So let me ask you something. When you hit play on your phone today, or maybe flip on the dial, who is actually picking the music you're listening to? By digging into this question, we're going to see how, over the course of several decades, we essentially traded the warmth of human curation for cold, data-driven efficiency. To figure that out, we're going on a 70-year journey. We'll look at the golden age of DJs, the rise of syndication and superstations, the talk radio titans, the 1996 corporate takeover, and finally, AI, the new DJ. Okay, starting with part 1, the golden age of DJs and the human voices in the dark. Before we had endless scrolling playlists, local DJs were literally the ultimate tastemakers. Back in the years following World War II, indie record labels just didn't have the massive distribution networks that the major corporate labels had. So, what they relied heavily on local radio DJs. These guys would spin obscure records late into the night, single-handedly building the grassroots foundation for rock and R&B, operating totally outside the powerful institutions that had controlled pop music for decades. The cultural impact of these local pioneers was just staggering. Take John R. at WLAC in Nashville, for instance. He pumped out a massive 50,000-watt clear channel signal, broadcasting R&B all across the segregated American South. It wasn't just entertainment, right? It was a vital cultural lifeline that helped bridge racial divides by giving crucial airplay to Black artists. And up in Cleveland, you had DJ Alan Freed doing something similar and actually popularizing the term rock and roll. These men weren't just playing music. They were local heroes defining youth culture, even setting up national mail-order pipelines for independent record shops. Moving to part 2, syndication and superstations, expanding the reach. The scale of how radio expanded is honestly mind-blowing. Back in the 1960s, the legendary DJ Wolfman Jack took his show to XERF. This was a Mexican border blaster station just across from Del Rio, Texas. Because he was broadcasting from Mexico, American federal limits just didn't apply to him. So XCRF is blasting this 250,000-watt signal, a signal so wildly powerful it covered most of the United States. There's even a legend that birds flying too close to the transmission towers would literally drop dead. I mean, that is some serious power. But here's where everything shifted. A Mexican government edict eventually forced Wolfman Jack off that massive transmitter. He had to pivot. And his pivot? He pioneered early syndication. He just took his old XRF broadcast tapes, edited them, and marketed them directly to other stations. This was a massive, massive game changer. It proved definitively that one single charismatic personality could totally bypass local live radio and dominate nationwide airwaves just using pre-recorded tapes. Which brings us to part 3, Talk Radio Titans, the era of national voices. So let's look at 2 colossal figures who took that syndication model and built absolute empires, Rush Limbaugh and Howard Stern. Looking at the facts, Limbaugh completely revolutionized the political talk format. He maintained this incredibly rigorous, unbending schedule, processing daily headlines through a strict conservative lens. Then, on the complete flip side, you have Howard Stern. He built his empire on comedy and shock, famously battling FCC government censorship for years before eventually shifting over to satellite radio, where he evolved into more of a softened celebrity interview format. Regardless of the content, both of these men proved beyond a doubt that syndicated national voices could completely eclipse local programming. And that sets the stage for part 4, the 1996 corporate takeover. Consolidation begins. If there is one inciting incident for modern radio, it's the Telecommunications Act of 1996. Before 96, the government had strict limits to prevent monopolies. A single company could only own a maximum of 40 stations nationwide. That meant independent, mom-and-pop stations could really thrive. But the 1996 Act massively deregulated those rules. Suddenly, one company could own as many as 8 stations in just a single local market. And almost overnight, this legislative shift triggered an era of rapid corporate consolidation and a widespread homogenization of the airwaves. One company in particular, Clear Channel Communications, jumped on this deregulation with staggering aggression. We're talking $30 billion spent to acquire over 1,200 stations across the country. They instantly became the nation's #1 radio chain, billboard owner, and venue operator all at once. This created a near monopoly that yanked programming power way out of local communities.
The goal was to create these national radio brands that sounded exactly the same whether you were driving through California or Ohio. And to streamline that massive new empire, corporations started relying heavily on something called voice tracking. It's exactly what it sounds like. To cut costs, a syndicated DJ pre-records their show, sometimes hundreds of miles away, and it gets broadcast across a bunch of smaller markets. Live listener interaction? Completely gone. The voice coming out of your speakers couldn't take a caller's request, couldn't give you the local weather, and definitely wasn't showing up to a local charity event. That local hero DJ was being systematically replaced by cheap, pre-recorded efficiency. And listeners, yeah, they definitely noticed. Just look at this quote from a 20-year-old college student back in the early 2000s. I turn on the radio and hear the same 5 songs over and over again. And she totally hit the nail on the head. This whole push for corporate efficiency was combined with independent middlemen, called indies, who were literally paid to secure song spins. It was basically a modern loophole around illegal payola laws that used to prevent bribing for airplay. The end result for us? Frustratingly repetitive, homogenized playlists that actively alienated listeners who just wanted some variety.
Now let's fast forward to part 5, AI, the new DJ.
So here we are in the modern era with streaming platforms like Spotify. Now, at first, streaming still relied heavily on human tastemakers. You had curators managing massive, culture-shaping playlists like Rap Caviar, all driven by human subjectivity and an ear for the cultural pulse. But recently, we're seeing a huge shift. Platforms are moving away from human curators and leaning hard into AI and algorithms. They're heavily pushing features like the AI DJ and constantly updating day lists. It is entirely data-driven now. Plus, there are features like Discovery Mode, where labels can actually accept lower royalty rates in exchange for a higher algorithmic push. Essentially, an algorithm is now dictating your next favorite song based entirely on underlying engagement metrics. Which brings us to a final thought here. Proponents will definitely argue that these algorithms democratize music, giving any artist a theoretical shot to reach an audience without needing some corporate gatekeeper, and fair enough. But when your app knows exactly what you want to hear with cold, mathematical precision, we kind of have to ask ourselves what we gave up to get here. From those 50,000-watt clear channel stations connecting communities in the dead of night, to the messy, vibrant, unpredictable human tastemakers who broke all the rules, have we permanently lost the magic of the local hero? Think about that the next time your app magically autoplays the absolute perfect track. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and until next time, keep listening closely.